Gwendolyn Graham and Catherine Wood. A woman who helped end at least 5 lives walked free from prison in January of 2020. Can you imagine that? Someone who spent decades behind bars for participating in the taking of human lives, someone whose victims were among society's most offenseless, was released to live among us again with barely a warning to her new neighbors. The case of Catherine Wood and her accomplice Gwendolyn Graham forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable questions. When two people commit atrocities together, is the one who claims to be merely the lookout truly less responsible? And when doubt clouds every aspect of a case, when we cannot be certain who did what or even how many died, does our justice system protect us adequately? The story begins at Alpine Manor nursing home in Walker, Michigan, a place where families entrusted their most frail relatives to professional care. The facility appeared unremarkable. Elderly residents with Alzheimer's disease and dementia lived out their final years under supervision. Among the staff were 2 nurses' aides whose names would eventually become linked in infamy. Catherine May would have been working there since 1985. She was in her mid-20s, recently divorced, still figuring out her path forward. Then Gwendolyn Gail Graham arrived in 1986 after relocating from Texas. The 2 women met at work. They became friends. That friendship evolved into something more. And according to what came later, that relationship twisted into something almost incomprehensible. Wood and Graham worked as nurses' aides at Alpine Manor during 1987 when at least 5 elderly patients died under circumstances that would eventually be labeled as homicide. During those winter months, 5 women passed away. Mae Mason, 79 years old. Edith Cook, 98. Marguerite Chambers, 60. Myrtle Luce, 95. Belle Burkhard, 74. Each woman suffered from conditions like dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Each departure appeared entirely natural at the time. Elderly people in nursing homes pass away regularly. Nobody suspected anything other than the inevitable end that comes to those in declining health. No autopsies were ordered. No investigations launched. Life continued normally at Alpine Manor. But approximately 1 year later, everything changed. The investigation began in 1988 when Wood confided details of alleged crimes to her ex-husband Ken, who then contacted police. What she revealed sent shockwaves through the quiet Michigan community. According to Wood's testimony to detectives from the Walker Police Department, she and Graham had ended those 5 lives intentionally. The motive Wood described seemed to belong in fiction rather than reality. She claimed the plan originated with Graham, who suggested that taking lives together would create an unbreakable bond between them. Neither could ever leave or report the other without implicating themselves. The relationship would be sealed by shared secrets too terrible to expose. Wood went further, describing an initial scheme to select victims whose first initials would spell out the word murder. When their first chosen targets proved stronger than anticipated and resisted, the couple abandoned the spelling plan. They simply began choosing patients who appeared too weak to fight back. Wood portrayed her role as secondary throughout. She claimed she stood watch while Graham entered rooms and placed washcloths over noses and mouths until breathing stopped. The relationship did not last. Graham began seeing another woman who also worked at Alpine Manor. She eventually returned to Texas with her new partner, taking employment in a neonatal unit at a hospital in Tyler, caring for newborns. Think about the fear families experienced when learning that information. Investigators faced significant challenges. Of the 5 alleged victims, only 2 had not been cremated. Those bodies were exhumed and examined, but pathologists found no definitive physical proof of how they died, which is not uncommon when dealing with suffocation cases. Despite this absence of concrete forensic evidence, the county medical examiner ruled the case as homicides based primarily on Wood's detailed confessions. Both women were arrested in December of 1988 and charged with multiple counts. Wood immediately secured a plea agreement in exchange for testifying against Graham. She agreed to plead to second-degree charges in one case and received a sentence of 20 to 40 years. Graham maintained complete innocence, arguing that Wood fabricated everything. The trial revealed competing narratives that remain unresolved decades later. Retired investigator Roger Kaliniak stated he believed Wood was actually the mastermind, the one pulling strings while Graham handled what he called the dirty work. Journalist Lowell Cauffield investigated extensively for his 1992 book titled Forever in 5 Days and raised serious questions about whether Wood might have been the actual perpetrator seeking revenge against Graham for ending their relationship, or whether the crimes happened at all. The jury, however, accepted Wood's version. Graham received convictions on 5 counts and 1 conspiracy charge. The judge imposed 5 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of release. For more than 30 years, both women remained imprisoned in separate facilities. Graham stayed in Michigan, would serve her time at the Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee, Florida. The Michigan Parole Board denied Wood's release 8 times, citing continued danger to society and lack of genuine remorse. But in September of 2018, something changed. The board reversed course and granted parole. Victims' families objected strenuously, but a Kent County judge ruled in October of 2019 that she should be released. On January 16, 2020, Catherine Wood walked out of federal prison over fierce opposition from relatives of those who died. Wood relocated to Fort Mill, South Carolina, to live with her sister. Local police and neighbors reported they received no advance warning about who was moving into their community. John Engman, whose mother-in-law, Mae Mason, was among the deceased, expressed his concerns publicly. The parole conditions prohibited Wood from working with children or vulnerable populations, but those restrictions expired in June of 2021. After that, nothing prevented her from going anywhere or doing anything any other citizen could do. Graham remains imprisoned in Michigan, serving life without parole. The truth of what happened in those rooms at Alpine Manor during those winter months of 1987 may never be fully known. Were 5 women taken before their time by 2 people who claimed to love each other? Or were there more? Investigators suspected the actual number might have reached 12. We are left with questions that have no satisfying answers. A justice system that released someone many believed still posed danger, and families forever wondering if the right person paid the higher price. Kristen Rossum. When the 911 call came through on the evening of November 6, 2000, the dispatcher heard a woman's voice, frantic yet somehow measured. She needed help. Her husband wasn't breathing. But when first responders arrived at the San Diego apartment, they encountered something that seemed lifted from a Hollywood film set rather than a genuine crisis. A young man lying motionless on a bed, his body surrounded by a constellation of crimson rose petals, wedding photographs placed deliberately beside him. Kristen Rossum, a toxicologist at the San Diego Medical Examiner's office, told authorities her husband Gregory DeVillers had taken his own life. She was 24 years old, brilliant, and by all appearances devastated. What could drive a 26-year-old man to such a desperate act? Had their marriage truly been that troubled? The scene suggested a romantic final gesture, a man who wanted his last moments to reflect the love he'd once known. Gregory DeVillers was pronounced deceased at the hospital. For his family, particularly his brother Jerome, the idea of ending his own life made no sense. Greg wasn't someone who spiraled into darkness. He had plans, ambitions, and despite whatever struggles existed in his marriage, those who knew him best couldn't reconcile the man they loved with someone who would orchestrate such a departure from the world. Kristen had seemed to have everything mapped out from an early age. Growing up in Claremont, California, as the oldest child of Ralph and Constance Rossum, she came from an academic family. Her father taught at Claremont McKenna College. When a family relocated to Virginia after her father accepted a college presidency, teenage Kristen enrolled at an exclusive boarding school. But beneath the veneer of privilege and achievement, something darker was taking root. She began experimenting with substances, marijuana, alcohol, tobacco, a habit that would later morph into something far more destructive. By the time she met Greg, she was already battling methamphetamine use. Yet somehow, she managed to compartmentalize this struggle. She graduated summa cum laude with a degree in chemistry from San Diego State University. How does someone excel academically while grappling with with such powerful compulsions. Greg knew about her past when they married in June 1999 after a 5-year courtship. Perhaps he believed love could conquer her demons. Perhaps she believed it too. Their union appeared promising on the surface. Kristen secured a position at the medical examiner's office, work that utilized her scientific training and placed her among professionals. But workplaces can become complicated when personal boundaries blur. Michael Robertson, an Australian toxicologist with expertise in forensic medicine, served as her supervisor. What begins as professional collaboration can shift imperceptibly into something else entirely. For Kristen, that shift occurred. As her marriage to Greg continued, so did her relapse into methamphetamine use. But this wasn't recreational experimentation anymore. She was stealing the substance from the very laboratory where she worked, the same place entrusted with investigating deaths throughout San Diego County. The irony was bitter. Robertson knew. He knew about her renewed habit, knew about the missing drugs, and kept silent. When Greg discovered both the relapse and the relationship with Robertson, he made a decision that would ultimately seal someone's fate. He threatened to expose everything to her employers if she didn't resign. What happened next has been debated in courtrooms and dissected by legal experts for years. The rose petal scene that November evening raised immediate suspicions among investigators, though initially they proceeded cautiously. Because Kristen worked at the medical examiner's office, authorities outsourced the examination to a Los Angeles laboratory to avoid conflicts of interest. What they discovered was staggering. Gregory DeVillers had 7 times the fatal amount of fentanyl in his system, a powerful narcotic that most people never encounter in their lives. Fentanyl isn't something found in typical medicine cabinets. It's specialized, dangerous, and rarely tested for in standard examinations. But Kristen would have known all of this. As a toxicologist, she understood exactly how fentanyl worked, how quickly it acted, and, crucially, that her office didn't routinely test for it during examinations. She also had access to it. When investigators learned about the missing fentanyl from the laboratory, the pieces began forming a disturbing pattern. On the day Greg passed away, Kristen made a purchase at a supermarket: soup, cold medicine, and a single rose. She claimed it was yellow, a gift for Robertson. But the petals scattered across her husband's body were red. Small details like this can unravel carefully constructed narratives. 7 months after Gregory's passing, in June 2001, Kristen was arrested and charged. Her parents posted $1.25 million bail, standing firmly beside their daughter, insisting on her innocence. The trial that followed became a media spectacle. Cameras weren't permitted inside the courtroom, but they captured every entrance and exit, tracking her fashionable clothing choices. For more than 8 hours, she testified, maintaining that her only transgression was unfaithfulness to her marriage vows. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty of first-degree homicide. On December 12, 2002, she received a life sentence without possibility of release. The woman who once graduated at the top of her class now resides at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. The DeVillers family pursued civil proceedings, ultimately winning over $100 million in punitive damages, later reduced but still substantial. Their attorney acknowledged they might never collect the money, but the goal was ensuring Kristen could never profit from her story. No book deals, no movie rights, no transformation of Greg's final moments into entertainment. Years later, appeals continue, with attorneys arguing about evidence and testing procedures. But for Gregory DeVillers, there are no more appeals, no second chances. His family remembers a man whose life ended not in the romantic tragedy the rose petal suggested, but in an act they believe was calculated, cold, and thoroughly planned by someone who understood exactly what she was doing. Carol Bundy. When someone confesses to taking a life, we expect to see remorse, to hear the trembling voice of guilt, to witness some acknowledgement that a line has been crossed from which there is no return. But what if the confession comes with a smile? What if the person sitting across from detectives seems almost pleased with themselves? What if they describe taking a life as though recounting a weekend trip, rather than an act of ultimate violence. Carol Bundy's case forces us to confront the unsettling reality that some people view destruction the same way others view creation, as something to be proud of, something to share, something that brings them joy rather than shame. Carol Mary Peters was born on August 26, 1942, into a home that should have provided protection, but instead delivered pain. Both of her parents struggled with alcoholism, creating an environment of instability and harm. When Carol was still a child, her mother passed away. What followed was worse. Her father began abusing her when she was just 11 years old. After he remarried, he placed her into various foster homes, moving her from place to place as though she were a problem to be solved rather than a child in need of care. At 17 years old, Carol married a man who was 56. That marriage would be the first of three, each one marked by dysfunction and turmoil. By the time she reached her late 30s, she had 2 young sons and was working as a vocational nurse. In 1980, Carol met Douglas Clark at a bar called Little Nashville on Christmas Day. Clark was born March 10, 1948, the son of a Navy intelligence officer. He had spent his childhood moving between countries, living what appeared from the outside to be a privileged life. But beneath that surface lay something deeply disturbed. Clark had been fired from his job at the Jergens soap factory due to frequent absences and making threats against co-workers. He spent his time in bars searching for lonely women he could exploit financially. When he met Carol, something clicked between them. They developed an intense relationship that centered around dark fantasies. Carol, who later described herself as having been a plain and unremarkable person before meeting Doug, saw him as an exciting adventure. She had escaped her 3rd marriage to an abusive husband and was searching for something to make her feel alive. Doug offered that, but the price would be unimaginable. Clark began bringing individuals back to their shared apartment. The relationship escalated in disturbing ways. Together, they harmed an 11-year-old neighbor girl in their apartment complex, documenting the abuse in photographs. Clark confided his ultimate desire to Carol. He wanted to end someone's life during an intimate encounter. Rather than leaving or contacting authorities, Carol purchased 2 firearms for him. The summer of 1980 brought terror to Los Angeles. On June 11th, 2 teenage stepsisters, 15-year-old Gina Morano and 16-year-old Cynthia Chandler, vanished from Huntington Beach while trying to meet friends. Their bodies were discovered the following morning beside the Ventura Freeway near Griffith Park, each having been shot in the side of the head. Clark later told Carol about the 2 teenagers he had picked up on Sunset Strip, describing how he had forced them to perform acts at gunpoint before ending their lives and violating their bodies after expiration. Carol became uneasy enough to phone police, admitting to having some knowledge, but refusing to identify Clark. He reassured her that if they were caught, he would take full responsibility so she could go free. On June 24, 1980, Clark took the lives of 2 individuals, 24-year-old Karen Lee Jones and 20-year-old Exie LaFay Wilson. The details of what happened next remain among the most disturbing aspects of the case. But for ad-friendly purposes, suffice it to say that evidence was kept and treated in ways that demonstrated complete detachment from humanity. A 3rd victim, known only as Jane Doe 28, was found in March of 1981 in Green Valley, California. Clark claimed Carol was responsible, while Carol claimed Doug pulled the trigger. Carol had also become involved with Jack Murray, her apartment building manager and part-time country singer. She confided in Murray about what was happening. Murray became alarmed and suggested he might contact authorities. Carol lured Murray into his van under false pretenses and ended his life, also removing his head. She left evidence behind, including shell casings in the vehicle. Murray's head was never recovered. 2 days after taking Murray's life, Carol broke down at work and confessed to her fellow nurses. They alerted authorities, and on August 11th, 1980, both Carol and Doug were arrested. In custody, Carol detailed everything implicating Doug in multiple cases. During Doug's trial, Carol testified against him after being granted use immunity for those particular incidents. She appeared dressed conservatively and spoke articulately about being under Doug's influence. However, She undermined herself with a letter she had written explicitly stating that she could not be trusted to tell the truth. On January 28th, after 5 days of deliberation, Doug Clark was found guilty of 6 counts and 1 count of attempted harm. He was sentenced to pass away in the gas chamber, receiving 6 such sentences. Carol struck a plea agreement on May 2nd, 1983, pleading guilty to 2 cases. She received 52 years to life, 27 years to life for Murray, and another 25 years to life to be served consecutively for assisting in another case. Carol M. Bundy passed away in prison in December of 2003 from heart failure. Doug Clark remained on death row at San Quentin until October 11, 2023, when he too passed away from natural causes at 75 years old. Their story remains one of the most disturbing partnerships in American criminal history. A relationship built not on love, but on shared darkness, where 2 broken people found each other and created something far worse than either might have become alone. Sheila Davalloo. Success and education are supposed to guide people toward better choices, toward empathy and moral clarity. A Harvard degree, a respected career, a life built on achievement. These things should lead to wisdom, not destruction. But what happens when intelligence becomes a tool for deception rather than progress? When someone uses their professional skills not to heal or help, but to eliminate anyone standing between them and what they want. Sheila Davalloo's story reminds us that brilliance without conscience can become something far more dangerous than ordinary human weakness. How does someone with so much potential choose a path that ends in such darkness? Sheila Davalloo was born in 1969 and grew up to become a research scientist, the kind of person who spent her days working with precision instruments and complex data. By 2000, she had secured employment at Purdue Pharma in Stamford, Connecticut, a prestigious pharmaceutical company where she worked alongside other highly educated professionals. Her life appeared to be one of achievement and promise. She had married Paul Christos in 2000, a man who worked as a medical school teacher. On the surface, everything looked like it was progressing exactly as it should. But underneath that veneer of normalcy, Sheila was building a web of lies so intricate that even her own husband had no idea who she really was. At Purdue Pharma, Sheila met Nelson Sessler, a 33-year-old research scientist. Despite being married to Paul, Sheila began an affair with Nelson. She told him she was divorced, and he believed her. The relationship continued for months, with Sheila maintaining 2 completely separate lives. When Paul was home, she played the role of wife. When Nelson came to visit, she would send Paul away, telling him her mentally ill brother needed to stay at their Pleasantville, New York condominium. Paul, who knew from Sheila's parents that she did indeed have a brother with schizophrenia, believed the story. He would pack a bag and spend nights at his parents' house or in a hotel, never questioning why he had never actually met this brother or why the brother never attended their wedding. Sheila even had Paul remove his personal items from the bathroom before he left, creating the illusion of a single person's residence. Can you imagine living your life with someone and not realizing they were erasing your entire existence whenever it suited them? The deception worked perfectly until the summer of 2002, when Nelson's attention shifted to another coworker. Annalisa Raimondo was 32 years old, a Harvard graduate with a master's degree from Columbia University who had worked at Purdue Pharma for several years. Nelson and Anna began dating. And by the time Anna left Purdue to take a position at Pharmacia in New Jersey, Nelson had ended his relationship with Sheila. He moved in with Anna at her Stamford condominium at 123 Harbor Drive, apartment 105. According to Nelson, Sheila seemed okay with the breakup, accepting it as merely a summer romance that had run its course. But acceptance was the furthest thing from what Sheila actually felt. Sheila began telling Paul elaborate stories about a love triangle at work involving 3 fictional co-workers. She called them Melissa, Jack, and Annalisa. According to Sheila, her friend Melissa was devastated because Jack, whom Melissa loved, was also in a relationship with Annalisa. Every single day, Sheila would update Paul on this ongoing drama, sharing intimate details about Melissa's sadness and her attempts to win Jack back. Paul listened to humor his wife, not realizing that Melissa was Sheila, Jack was Nelson, and Annalisa was the real Annalisa Raimundo. Sheila even asked Paul to lend her night vision binoculars and an eavesdropping device so that Melissa could spy on Jack. Paul, who had noticed that their marriage had become more like roommates than spouses, complied with these strange requests without understanding their true purpose. On November 8, 2002, a 911 dispatch center in Stanford received a call from a woman claiming to be a neighbor who had witnessed a man attacking someone in apartment 105 at 123 Harbor Drive. The caller gave an incorrect address at first, then corrected herself before hanging up without identifying herself or providing her name. When officers arrived at Annalisa Raimundo's apartment, they discovered her body. She had been attacked with extreme force, with evidence of a violent struggle throughout the residence. The scene showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting Anna had known her assailant and opened the door willingly. The case went unsolved for months. Then, on March 23, 2003, Sheila convinced Paul to play what she described as a game. She handcuffed him and blindfolded him, telling him she would touch his body with various objects and he would have to guess what they were. Instead of a game, Sheila used a paring knife to harm Paul twice in the chest. When he realized what was happening and begged her to call 911, she claimed it was an accident. Paul insisted he needed medical attention. Sheila eventually agreed to drive him to Westchester County Hospital, but when they arrived, instead of going to the emergency room entrance, she stopped in an isolated area of the parking lot and attacked him a third time. A witness saw the assault and Paul was rushed inside, where emergency surgery saved his life. Sheila was arrested immediately. When police examined her phone records, they discovered that when Sheila claimed she had tried to call 911 for Paul, she had actually called Nelson Sessler to invite him over for dinner. During questioning, Nelson revealed something that shocked him. He had no idea Sheila was married, despite visiting her home regularly for years. This revelation led investigators to take a closer look at Sheila's background, and voice analysis experts determined that the fraudulent 911 call from Annalisa Raimundo's residence matched Sheila's voice pattern. Security records from Purdue Pharma showed that Sheila had been absent from work between 10:53 in the morning and 1:53 in the afternoon on November 8, 2002, the exact window when Anna was attacked. In 2004, Sheila was convicted of attempted harm and assault in New York for the attack on Paul Christos. She received 25 years. Then, in December of 2008, she was arrested and charged with Annalisa Raimundo's ending. At her trial in 2012, Sheila chose to represent herself, questioning witnesses including her ex-husband and former lover. The jury found her responsible on February 10, 2012. In April of that year, Judge Richard Comerford sentenced her to 50 years to be served after completing her New York sentence. Sheila Davalloo remains incarcerated at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in Westchester County, New York, where she continues to maintain her innocence despite overwhelming evidence against her. Celeste Beard Johnson, money changes everything, or does it simply reveal what was always there beneath the surface? When a 30-year-old waitress with twin daughters married a 75-year-old television executive worth millions, Austin society whispered about motives. But nobody could have predicted how this union of May and December would end, with a midnight intruder, a shotgun blast, and a twisted love triangle that would shock Texas. Celeste Johnson's beginnings held none of the glamour that would later define her existence. Born on February 13th, 1963, she entered a world that never truly wanted her. Her biological mother delivered a message so cold it could freeze blood. "I am not your mother, I was just your incubator." Adoption should have offered salvation, but instead brought different torments. She claimed her adoptive father abused her, driving her to attempt ending her own life during those vulnerable teenage years. By 17, she was pregnant with twins, Jennifer and Christina, trapped in a relationship with an abusive partner named Craig Bratcher. When Bratcher took his own life in 1996, Celeste found herself adrift, twice divorced, working tables at an exclusive country club, searching for something she couldn't quite name. That something walked through the door in the form of Stephen Beard, a self-made millionaire and retired Fox broadcasting executive whose wife had recently passed from cancer. He was 68. She was 30. Their first date happened less than 3 weeks after his wife's funeral, an extravagant Italian dinner followed by drinks at his estate. When Stephen handed her the keys to his $50,000 Lexus sedan so she could drive herself home, Celeste must have felt possibilities unfurling. They married in February 1995. Suddenly, this woman who'd known hardship and abuse had everything. A mansion, unlimited resources, financial security for her daughters. But having everything wasn't enough. Their monthly budget reached $35,000, yet Celeste spent far more. Shopping sprees, lavish parties, designer, everything. The money flowed like water, and Stephen began to notice. He talked about divorce. The fairy tale was cracking, and beneath it lay something desperate and dark. In the summer of 1999, struggling with what she called depression, Celeste checked herself into St. David's Pavilion, a mental health facility in Austin. There she met Tracy Tarleton, a former bookstore manager dealing with her own psychological struggles. What began as friendship evolved into something more complex. Tracy later described it as romance, an intimate connection she believed was reciprocated. Celeste would deny this characterization, insisting they were merely friends. But witnesses at parties noticed something undeniable. Physical affection that went beyond platonic boundaries, moments of closeness that suggested deeper feelings. What did Celeste tell Tracy during their private conversations? According to Tracy's later testimony, Celeste painted Stephen as emotionally abusive, a man who made her life unbearable. She suggested there was only one way they could truly be together. Can love make someone capable of the unthinkable? Or was this manipulation disguised as affection? On October 2nd, 1999, in the pre-dawn darkness, someone entered Stephen Beard's bedroom while he slept in his Westlake Hills home. A 20-gauge shotgun fired point-blank into his stomach. Stephen managed to call 911, gasping to the operator that his internal organs were in his hands. He survived the initial trauma, spending 3 months hospitalized before returning home under Celeste's care. Then, on January 22, 2000, complications from his injuries took his life, specifically a blood clot that doctors traced back to the gunshot wound. Celeste's grief seemed performative to those watching closely. She told investigators her whole world had ended. But actions spoke differently. She attended Mardi Gras shortly after Stephen's passing. 5 months later, she married 41-year-old Cole Johnson. Did she mourn at all? Or was this the freedom she'd been seeking? Authorities arrested Tracy Tarleton 6 days after the shooting. Ballistic evidence linked her shotgun to the shell found in Stephen's bedroom. She confessed, initially taking full responsibility. But when she read in a local newspaper that Celeste had remarried, reality shattered the fantasy. The relationship she believed they shared had been an illusion. Feeling betrayed and used, Tracy changed her story. In exchange for a plea bargain, she revealed what she claimed was the truth. Celeste had orchestrated everything, convincing her that ending Stephen's life was the only path to their happiness together. The trial became a media sensation. Prosecutors painted Celeste as a calculating woman who married for money and eliminated her husband when he threatened to cut off her spending. Stephen's attorney testified that while the marriage had struggles, Stephen didn't want divorce and was working through issues in therapy with Celeste. Defense lawyers characterized Tracy as mentally unstable, suffering from delusions and obsessive fantasies, claiming she acted alone out of twisted infatuation. Then came the most devastating testimony from Celeste's own daughters. Jennifer and Christina took the stand against their mother, recounting how she openly expressed disgust for Stephen, admitting she married him for his wealth. They described their mother waving a weapon during a volatile moment when divorce was being discussed. Most damaging was an audio tape where Celeste allegedly discussed hiring someone to harm Tracy. Though Celeste's lawyers claimed the recording had been altered, the judge deemed it authentic. The daughters also testified about their mother's behavior after Stephen returned home from the hospital. They claimed she changed his wound dressings with unwashed hands, seemingly hoping complications would finish what the gunshot started. Celeste vehemently denied this, pointing out that she took Stephen back to medical professionals when he appeared unwell. On March 28, 2002, Celeste was arrested. The jury convicted her of capital murder and injury to an elderly individual. She received a life sentence. Today, she remains incarcerated at the Christina Melton Crane Unit in Gatesville, Texas. From her cell, she's expressed one wish above all others: to speak with Jennifer and Christina, to tell them she always loved them and apologize for failing as their mother. Tracy Tarleton also received prison time for her role in Stephen Beard's demise. Two women, both convicted, both claiming different versions of how manipulation, obsession, or calculated greed led to a wealthy man's final breath. The truth remains contested, but the outcome stays fixed. Stephen Beard is gone, his millions now controlled by the very system that convicted his widow, and Celeste Johnson Beard will likely spend her remaining years behind bars. Wealthy on paper, but Lyda Trueblood. Marriage is supposed to be for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do you part. But what happens when someone decides to accelerate that final part? When the vows become a death sentence, and the wedding ring transforms into a countdown timer? Lyda Trueblood's story reveals something deeply unsettling about human nature. How someone can stand beside a person they promise to love, watch them suffer day after agonizing day, and know that every spasm of pain, every moment of nausea, every cry of distress is their own doing. How does a person maintain that performance while counting the days until an insurance check arrives? Lyda Anime Trueblood was born on October 16, 1892, in Catesville, Missouri, 60 miles northeast of Kansas City. Her family eventually relocated to Twin Falls, Idaho, around 1906, settling on farmland south of the High Line Canal. The Truebloods grew clover, contract beans, and early peas on 80 acres of their own land on the Salmon Tract and rented another 80 acres from neighbor. Lyda grew up in this agricultural community, attending local schools and eventually catching the attention of a young man named Robert C. Dooley. Robert fell for Lyda, and on March 17, 1912, when Lyda was 19 years old, they married. The couple settled with Robert's brother Edward on a ranch in Twin Falls, and in 1914, Lyda gave birth to a daughter they named Lorraine. For a time, life appeared ordinary, but that ordinariness wouldn't last. In 1915, Lorraine became suddenly ill and passed away. Lyda claimed the child had drunk water from a contaminated well. It was a reasonable explanation in an era when such tragedies were common. Just months later, in August of 1915, Edward Dooley fell sick with what doctors diagnosed as ptomaine poisoning. He died shortly after. Then, in October of 1915, Robert himself became ill, suffering from what physicians identified as typhoid fever. He passed away on October 12th, leaving Lyda as the sole survivor of what had been a family of four. Nobody suspected anything at the time. Typhoid fever was widespread in those years. Medical care in 1915 relied heavily on guesswork rather than scientific certainty. Deaths from illness were heartbreaking, but not unusual. Lyda collected on Robert's life insurance policy and appeared to be a young widow grieving multiple losses. Within 2 years, she had met and married William G. McHaffel in June of 1917. The couple moved to Montana, seeking a fresh start. But history repeated itself. Not long after the move, Lyda's young daughter from a previous relationship fell ill and died. Then on October 1st, 1918, McHaffel himself became sick with what doctors believed was influenza and diphtheria. He passed away, and once again, Lyda collected life insurance money. By June of 1919, Lyda had married for a third time to Harlan C. Lewis, an automobile salesman she had met in Montana. Their marriage lasted only 1 month. On July 6, 1919, Lewis died from what physicians diagnosed as ptomaine poisoning. Lyda collected $5,000 in insurance. She returned to Twin Falls, where she met Edward F. Meyer, a ranch foreman. They married on August 10, 1920. Just days before the wedding, Meyer had secured a $10,000 life insurance policy with Lyda named as beneficiary. Within weeks of their marriage, Meyer fell ill. On September 7, 1920, he passed away. Doctors listed typhoid fever as the cause. But this time, someone was paying attention. Earl Dooley was a chemist in Twin Falls and a cousin of Robert and Edward Dooley, Lyda's first husband and brother-in-law. Earl had watched his family members die under circumstances that seemed increasingly suspicious. After Meyer's passing, Earl examined Meyer's throat and noticed burns that suggested poison exposure. He recognized the signs of arsenic. Earl pushed to have the bodies of his cousins and young Lorraine exhumed. If they had been poisoned, testing would reveal it. The results confirmed Earl's suspicions. All three bodies contained arsenic. They had been taken intentionally. Twin Falls County Prosecutor Frank Steffen launched a full investigation and ordered the exhumation of additional victims. Tests revealed arsenic in multiple bodies. Investigators discovered that Lyda had been obtaining arsenic by boiling flypaper, a common household item at the time that contained the poison as an active ingredient. She would soak the paper, extract the arsenic, and add it to food or drink. The poisoning wasn't quick. Victims suffered constant nausea, stomach pain, vomiting, and diarrhea for days or weeks before passing. Lyda had fed this to people she claimed to love and watched them endure slow, agonizing ends. Examination of Idaho State Life Insurance Company records revealed that all of Lyda's deceased husbands had taken out policies naming her as beneficiary. Over the years, she had collected more than $7,000, roughly equivalent to over $100,000 in today's money. Authorities prepared to arrest Lyda, but she had already fled. Investigators tracked her to Honolulu, Hawaii, where she was living under the name Mrs. Paul Southard. She had married Navy Petty Officer Paul Southard, her fifth husband. The only thing that may have saved his life was his refusal to take out a separate life insurance policy beyond his military coverage. When police arrested Lyda and informed Paul of her history, he was stunned but stood by her initially. Lyda was extradited back to Idaho and arraigned on June 11, 1921. She pleaded not guilty in court, but the evidence was overwhelming. After a 6-week trial that captivated the nation, the jury convicted her of second-degree homicide in Edward Meyer's case on September 30, 1921. She was sentenced to 10 years to life at the old Idaho State Penitentiary in Boise. The story didn't end there. On May 4, 1931, Lyda executed a daring escape. Using a smuggled saw, she cut through her cell window bars. She climbed down using a rope fashioned from twisted bed sheets and scaled the 17-foot prison wall using makeshift ladders from her rose garden trellises. Outside waited David Minton, a fellow prisoner who had recently been released and had fallen for Lyda through letters. They fled to Denver, where Lyda quickly grew tired of him and moved on. She charmed Harry Whitlock, a wealthy widower, and married him in March of 1932. Police recaptured her in Topeka, Kansas, in July of 1932. She was returned to prison, where she served until 1941 when she was granted probationary release. She received a full pardon in 1943. Lyda married one more time to Hal Shaw, a wealthy man. He later disappeared under mysterious circumstances. On February 5, 1958, Lyda died of a heart attack at age 65 while carrying groceries to her employer's home in Salt Lake City. Her body was reportedly hairless, a side effect of prolonged arsenic exposure. While Lyda proclaimed innocence throughout her life, her own body betrayed her secrets in the end. Shonda Johnson. What possesses someone to entangle 5 different people in marriage vows while never fully releasing any of them? Shonda Nicole Johnson, born September 30th, 1969, grew up in the small Alabama town of Jasper, where her reputation preceded any truth about who she really was. She wasn't conventionally attractive by magazine standards, yet men seemed drawn to her, drawn into webs she wove with fabricated stories about being a cheerleader, a homecoming queen, a paramedic. None of these claims held water. She dropped out of high school and remained unemployed, But that didn't stop her from creating elaborate fictions about her life. Her first marriage came at 18 to Jeff Nelson. 6 turbulent years followed, marked by police calls and domestic turmoil, before they divorced. The pattern was established, relationships that started with promises and ended in chaos. Her second husband, Jimmy Tidwell, lasted only 5 months before their marriage dissolved. Then came Randy McCullough in 1995, husband number 3. For a while, they seemed content. They had a child together. But contentment wasn't something Shonda could maintain for long. When the marriage to Randy began fracturing, they separated without filing for divorce, a decision that would prove fatal. 3 months after their split, Randy heard whispers that Shonda had married another man named William Howard McIntyre Jr. The rumors were true. She was pregnant with Randy's child when she married Bill. How does someone compartmentalize that level of deception? How do you carry one man's baby while exchanging vows with another? Randy discovered the truth and did what any rational person would do. He filed bigamy charges against her. He also sought custody of their infant son and initiated divorce proceedings. 3 weeks later, Randy McCullough will be gone. His life ended in a church parking lot on November 30th, 1997. But Shonda's tangled matrimonial web didn't end with Bill McIntyre. In 1997, while still legally married to Randy, she married Timothy Richards, making him husband number 5, if you're keeping count. Richards was completely enamored with her, willing to do anything she asked. And what she asked was unthinkable. The bigamy charge Randy filed wasn't just embarrassing. It threatened to expose everything. Randy had testified before a grand jury about Shonda's multiple marriages, and that testimony became the foundation for her prosecution. She couldn't allow that to continue. According to testimony from men she'd been involved with between marriages, this wasn't the first time she'd tried to orchestrate Randy's demise. A former boyfriend named Ronnie Webb, who lived with her in 1996, testified that after Randy filed the bigamy warrant, Shonda constantly talked about wanting somebody to do away with Randy McCullough. She suggested Webb get dynamite and handle it immediately. He refused. Another boyfriend, David Prescott, also received similar requests. Neither would help her. But Timothy Richards was different. Richards was so deeply infatuated that he became the instrument of her will. Together, they planned Randy's end with calculated precision. They waited outside the BC Lounge, a local bar Randy frequented. While he was inside drinking, they slashed his tires, ensuring he'd be vulnerable when he came out. Randy emerged intoxicated, ready to head home, and discovered his flat tire. As he bent down to change it in the parking lot, Timothy Richards, at Shonda's direction, pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Randy in the back of his head. He died from the wound. After the act, Richards and Shonda drove back to their apartment in Jasper. They disposed of the weapon by throwing the rifle off Littleton's Bridge near Good Springs, Alabama. The gun case went into Baker's Creek in the same area. Then they returned home. According to Richards' later testimony, Shonda wanted intimacy that night. He couldn't manage it. He stayed awake all night while she slept. Law enforcement immediately suspected Shonda's involvement. When arrested, she initially denied everything. Denied planning the incident, denied her marriage to Randy, denied any role whatsoever. But she eventually admitted being in the truck when Richards pulled the trigger. Richards, meanwhile, heard recordings of Shonda's interrogations where she attempted to place all blame on him. Betrayed by the woman he'd committed the ultimate crime for, he broke down and confessed everything. He accepted a plea agreement that included testifying against Shonda in exchange for life with the possibility of parole. The trial revealed the full scope of Shonda's manipulations. Prosecutors presented evidence of her multiple marriages, her repeated attempts to find someone willing to eliminate Randy, and the damning fact that Randy had testified before a grand jury in her bigamy case. Under Alabama law, this made Randy's ending a capital offense, specifically terminating someone who had testified or been subpoenaed to testify in legal proceedings when the act stems from their role as a witness. Shonda pleaded guilty to bigamy. On November 30th, 1999, exactly 2 years after Randy's passing, a jury convicted her of capital murder. By a vote of 11-1, they recommended death. The trial court followed their recommendation. Shonda Nicole Johnson was sentenced to die. Appeals followed, as they do in capital cases. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals initially overturned her conviction and death sentence, but the Alabama Supreme Court reversed that decision in 2006, reinstating both her conviction and death sentence. Ronnie Webb, the boyfriend who refused to help her eliminate Randy, died of AIDS complications shortly before her murder trial concluded. Timothy Richards, serving his life sentence, escaped from a minimum security facility in Hale County in April 2012. Randy's family was outraged, not just by the escape, but by the fact that a cold-blooded killer had been assigned to minimum security in the first place. Richards was recaptured 2 days later and returned to prison. Randy's mother, Betty McCullough, told reporters after Richards' escape that she'd heard her son's voice one night after his passing. He said, "Mama, look what they done to me. I knew who it was. I knew who did it." She knew from the beginning that her son's wife and her newest lover had taken him from her. As of 2025, Shonda Nicole Johnson remains on Alabama's death row, waiting for the sentence recommended by that jury 26 years ago. 5 marriages, multiple betrayals, 1 man eliminated for threatening to expose her crimes. All because she couldn't stop weaving webs of deception that eventually strangled the life out of someone who dared to tell the truth. Priscilla Ford. Holidays are when we gather with those we love, when streets fill with laughter and the promise of celebration, when communities come together and share joy. Thanksgiving Day 1980 was meant to be exactly the kind of moment in downtown Reno, Nevada. Families strolled along Virginia Street. Couples window shopped. Tourists explored the casinos, offering special holiday dinners. The afternoon sun warmed the sidewalks. Everything felt perfectly ordinary until it wasn't. Until a blue 1974 Lincoln Continental jumped the curb and transformed celebration into catastrophe in a matter of seconds. 6 people would not survive that day. 23 more would carry physical and emotional wounds for the rest of their lives. And the woman behind the wheel, Priscilla Joyce Ford, would become the only woman on Nevada's death row for over 2 decades. How does a moment of horror like this happen? What transforms a holiday into a tragedy that people still remember with pain a quarter century later? Priscilla Joyce Ford was born on February 10th, 1929, in Berrien Springs, Michigan. She grew up to become a schoolteacher, working in a one-room schoolhouse in Dowagiac, Michigan, despite having only a high school education herself. Those who knew her during those years describe her as gifted in the classroom. She had an intelligence quotient of 140, placing her in the highly gifted range. For a time, her life followed a recognizable path. She married and had children, including a daughter named Winter Scott. But something began to shift during the early 1970s. Family members and friends started reporting increasingly bizarre behavior. By 1972, her own son, returning home from military service, found his mother delusional and struggling with alcohol dependency. In 1973, Ford moved to Reno and voluntarily admitted herself to the Nevada Mental Health Institute. She received treatment and was released with a diagnosis of passive-aggressive personality with hysterical episodes. During this period, Washoe County Child Welfare authorities removed her 11-year-old daughter Winter from her custody after Ford was arrested for trespassing and assault. Winter was placed in foster care. Ford would later claim that Reno had stolen her child, and that anger would simmer for 7 years. She moved away, eventually settling in Maine. In May of 1980, while living in Maine, Ford approached an attorney asking for help getting her daughter back. When he couldn't assist her, she reportedly told him that if he didn't help, she would run down pedestrians. By November of 1980, Ford had left Maine and was driving toward San Francisco. She stopped in Reno to cash a check and decided to stay. She secured temporary employment as a package wrapper at Macy's department store. On Thanksgiving morning, November 27, 1980, Ford spent her day consuming cheese and wine in her room. Her blood alcohol level would later be measured at .162, more than double the legal limit. As the afternoon approached, downtown Reno filled with people. The holiday brought out families, couples, and tourists. The weather was pleasant for late November. Virginia Street bustled with activity. Just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Ford drove her Lincoln Continental north on South Virginia Street. Near the intersection with 2nd Street, she suddenly steered onto the sidewalk. Witnesses would later describe her accelerating to approximately 40 miles per hour, aiming directly at pedestrians. She drove back and forth between the street and sidewalks for approximately 5 blocks, from 2nd Street north to the railroad tracks. People threw themselves out her path. Some succeeded. Many did not. Bodies flew through the air. Others fell beneath the wheels. The scene resembled a war zone. Shopping bags lay crushed alongside discarded shoes. Broken street signs were scattered like debris. One Canadian tourist told reporters it looked as though someone had driven a lawnmower through the crowd. 6 people died that day. 3 men and 3 women. Another person would succumb to injuries later, bringing the total to 7. 23 others suffered various injuries requiring hospitalization. 10 were rushed to St. Mary's Hospital. 14 went to Washoe Medical Center. Dick Kirkland, who served as Reno's police chief, arrived at the scene and later said he initially thought a bomb had exploded. There were bodies lying the full length of Virginia Street. There were body parts scattered among the wreckage. Nothing in his 4 decades of law enforcement had prepared him for what he witnessed. Ford drove 5 blocks before stopping calmly at a red light. Police located her quickly and took her into custody. She was transported to the same hospital treating her victims. Almost immediately, she began making disturbing statements. She asked a deputy district attorney how many she had eliminated. When told the number, she responded that the more gone the better. She referred to her victims as beasts and pigs. She showed no remorse, no recognition of what she had done. Ford was charged with 6 counts of first-degree harm and 23 counts of attempted harm. She was initially found incompetent to stand trial on January 29, 1981, and sent to Lakes Crossing for mental treatment and medication. By August 4, 1981, she was declared competent. Her trial began on November 12, 1981, and lasted nearly 5 months, becoming the longest proceeding in Northern Nevada history at that time. Jury selection alone took almost a month. Ford pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, though she bristled at suggestions that she was mentally ill. She took the stand in February and testified that she was the incarnation of Jesus Christ and incapable of wrongdoing. She claimed that Joan Kennedy, wife of Senator Edward Kennedy, and journalist Barbara Walters had spoken to her through voices, instructing her actions. On March 20, 1982, after 5 days of deliberation, the jury found Ford responsible on all counts. On April 29, 1982, she was sentenced to pass away in Nevada's gas chamber, receiving 6 such sentences along with consecutive 20-year terms for each attempted offense count. The prosecutor called her wickedness personified. Her attorney argued she was severely mentally ill. Ford showed no emotion when the verdict was read. She launched numerous appeals over the following years, all of which failed. Nevada would eventually change its method of carrying out such sentences from gas chamber to lethal injection in 1983, but Ford would never face either. For over 20 years, Priscilla Ford remained the only woman on Nevada's death row at the Southern Nevada Women's Correctional Center in North Las Vegas. She lived quietly, later telling a reporter in 1985 that she didn't remember what happened and believed she had experienced some kind of accident. A heavy smoker throughout her life, she developed emphysema. On January 29, 2005, at age 75, Ford was pronounced gone at 11:05 in the morning from complications related to her respiratory condition. The question of whether mental illness should excuse actions that end lives remains one society continues to wrestle with, and Priscilla Ford's case sits at the center of that ongoing debate. Marjorie Armstrong. Genius can be a gift or a curse, and sometimes it becomes both at once. When someone with exceptional intelligence decides to use their abilities not to create, but to destroy, the results can be more elaborate and chilling than anything an ordinary person could conceive. Marjorie Armstrong was the valedictorian of her high school, a musical prodigy with gifts that should have led to a remarkable life. Instead, her story became one of the most bizarre and convoluted crimes in FBI history. A plan so intricate and strange that investigators would spend years trying to untangle its threads. How does a mind capable of such brilliance turn toward such darkness? Marjorie was born on February 26, 1949, in Erie, Pennsylvania. Her early years showed tremendous promise. She excelled academically, demonstrating the kind of intellectual capacity that teachers celebrate and parents hope will lead to great achievements. She played multiple instruments with skill that suggested professional potential. But beneath that achievement, something was fracturing. By her 20s, she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition that would grow increasingly severe as years passed. Her behavior became erratic. She grew manipulative. Relationships became battlegrounds. Her first serious encounter with the law came in 1984 when she shot her boyfriend Robert Thomas as he sat on their living room couch. In court, she successfully argued self-defense, claiming years of abuse. The jury acquitted her in 1988. Most people would have seen that verdict as a second chance, an opportunity to rebuild. Marjorie saw it differently. By 2003, Marjorie was entangled with several men, each relationship more dysfunctional than the last. One was William Rothstein, her former fiancé from decades earlier who had remained in her orbit despite their troubled history. Another was James Roden, who lived with her. A third was Kenneth Barnes, someone she spent time with regularly. Her life was chaotic, filled with hoarded government surplus food stacked throughout her house until the filth became overwhelming. Erie police officers who later searched her home would describe conditions worse than decomposing corpses. But amid that chaos, Marjorie's mind was working on something she believed would solve her problems. She had become obsessed with her inheritance. Her father was still alive, and Marjorie convinced herself he was squandering money that rightfully belonged to her. She developed a plan. She would stage a bank robbery to get the funds needed to hire Barnes to eliminate her father. But this would not be an ordinary robbery. Marjorie's plan involved using someone else to carry out the actual crime, someone she could control through fear and manipulation. That someone would be Brian Wells, a 46-year-old pizza delivery driver who worked at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria. On August 28, 2003, around 2:30 in the afternoon, Brian Wells walked into a PNC bank in Erie, Pennsylvania. He wore a bulky collar underneath his shirt. In his hand, he carried what appeared to be a cane, but was actually a shotgun. He passed a note to the teller demanding $250,000 and stating he had only 15 minutes. The teller could gather only $8,702. Wells took it and left. He drove to a nearby parking lot where state troopers apprehended him. Wells begged officers to call a bomb squad. He explained that someone had forced him to wear an explosive device around his neck and rob the bank. He insisted he was running out of time. For approximately 20 minutes, Wells sat on the pavement, handcuffed, trying to explain what had happened. He told police that the previous evening, while making a pizza delivery to a transmission tower location, he had been ambushed. Someone locked the collar bomb around his neck and handed him detailed instructions on how to rob the bank and complete a scavenger hunt to obtain keys that would supposedly disable the device. Police would later determine that completing the scavenger hunt in the allotted time would have been physically impossible. Wells never had a chance. As he sat there talking to officers, the device began beeping. His eyes rolled back. 10 seconds later, the bomb detonated, creating a hole in his chest. He was gone. The bomb squad arrived 3 minutes after the explosion. 3 weeks later, William Rothstein contacted police with a startling confession. He had a body in his freezer. When investigators arrived, they found James Roden, who had been shot. Rothstein explained that Marjorie had taken Roden's life during a dispute and asked for help disposing of the body. He had initially agreed, but now wanted to come forward. He also implicated Marjorie in the bank robbery plot. According to Rothstein, Marjorie had been the mastermind. She had provided him with kitchen timers, essential components of the collar bomb. Rothstein, an electrician and substitute teacher with mechanical skills, had constructed the device. He had even ordered the pizzas that lured Wells to the transmission tower. The investigation took years. Rothstein passed away from lymphoma in July of 2004 before he could be charged. In 2005, Marjorie pleaded guilty but mentally ill to third-degree harm in Roden's case and received 7 to 20 years. The bank robbery charges came in 2007 when both Marjorie and Kenneth Barnes were indicted. Barnes cooperated with prosecutors, testifying that Marjorie had orchestrated everything. He received a reduced sentence of 22.5 years. Marjorie went to trial in 2010. Her behavior in court was described as unhinged and unpredictable. Her own attorney said you never knew what you would get from her at any moment. On February 24, 2011, the jury found Marjorie Armstrong guilty of conspiracy, robbery, and using a destructive device resulting in loss of life. She was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years. She maintained throughout that others were truly responsible. On April 4, 2017, Marjorie Armstrong passed away from natural causes at the Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth, Texas. She was 68 years old. The question that haunted everyone involved in the case remains unanswered. Was Brian Wells a willing participant who believed the bomb was fake, or was he truly a hostage? His family insists he was forced. Investigators concluded he had some knowledge of the plan. We may never know the complete truth about that August afternoon when genius and madness collided in one of the strangest crimes America has ever witnessed. Dana Sue Gray. There's a particular kind of selfishness that goes beyond ordinary greed. A mindset so consumed by immediate desires that human life becomes nothing more than an inconvenience to be eliminated. When shopping becomes more important than breathing, when credit cards matter more than consciousness, when the rush of a new purchase outweighs the value of a beating heart, we're witnessing something that transcends typical criminal psychology. Dana Sue Gray's case forces us to ask, at what point does materialism become so all-consuming that it justifies taking lives? How does someone transform from caregiver to predator, all in service of feeding an addiction to spending money that wasn't even hers? Dana Sue Armbrust was born on December 6, 1957, in Southern California to Beverly and Russell Armbrust. Her father worked as a hairdresser and had been married 3 times before meeting Beverly, a former beauty queen who had once worked as an MGM starlet. Beverly was described by those who knew her as vain and aggressive, someone who routinely maxed out her husband's credit cards. The couple had several miscarriages before Dana was born. When Dana was only 2 years old, her parents divorced after Russell discovered Beverly physically fighting with an older woman who had somehow upset her. After the separation, Dana rarely saw her father. She began acting out, seeking the attention she felt was missing from her life. Despite this troubled beginning, Dana grew up and pursued nursing, eventually becoming a registered nurse specializing in labor and delivery at Inland Valley Regional Medical Center. She married a man named Tom Gray, and for a while, her life appeared to be following a normal trajectory. They purchased a home in the gated community of Canyon Lake, California, a quiet area popular with retirees. But beneath the surface of normalcy, cracks were forming. In early 1993, Dana left Tom and moved in with Jim Wilkins, a mutual friend who became her lover, along with his young son Jason. In June of 1993, she filed for divorce from Tom, though the paperwork wouldn't be finalized for years. In September of 1993, Dana and Tom filed for bankruptcy together, owing over $216,000 despite the increased value of their Canyon Lake home. On November 24, 1993, Dana was fired from the hospital where she had worked for years after being caught misappropriating Demerol and other opiate painkillers. She had suffered her 4th miscarriage. Her home went into foreclosure. By early 1994, she had only $100 left in her savings account. Everything was falling apart. On February 14, 1994, Valentine's Day, Dana sent word through Tom's parents asking to meet with him. Tom initially agreed, but never showed up. That same day, Dana took the life of 86-year-old Norma Davis, an elderly woman whose Canyon Lake condominium Dana had been sharing for a time. Norma was found in her home, having been attacked with extreme force. Detectives noted that there was no sign of forced entry, suggesting Norma had let her attacker inside willingly. 2 weeks later, on February 28th, Dana visited June Roberts, a 66-year-old woman who also lived in Canyon Lake's gated community. Dana knocked on June's door, claiming she wanted to borrow a book about controlling a drinking problem. June invited her inside. While June searched for the book, Dana unplugged both of June's telephones, removing both the straight cord and the curly cord. She used the curly telephone cord to strangle June. After June stopped breathing, Dana took 2 of her credit cards and immediately drove to an upscale shopping center in nearby Temecula. She had her hair permed at Ethetique Salon. She purchased clothing and jewelry totaling $695. She had lunch. According to witnesses who encountered her that day, she seemed cheerful and happy, telling multiple people she expected to go on a shopping spree. By the end of the day, she had charged $1,700 on June's cards. Dana later admitted to investigators that she had Jim Wilkins' young son Jason with her that day, leaving him in the car while she ended June's life. On March 10th, 1994, Dana entered an antique store in Lake Elsinore where 57-year-old Dorinda Hawkins was working alone. Dana said she wanted to buy a picture frame for a photo of her deceased mother. She used a telephone cord to strangle Dorinda, then stole $5 from Dorinda's purse and $20 from the cash register. Assuming Dorinda had passed, Dana left and went shopping an hour later using June Roberts' credit card. But Dorinda survived. She was able to provide police with a detailed description of her attacker. 6 days later, on March 16th, 1994, Dana knocked on the door of 87-year-old Dora Beebe at her Sun City condominium. Dora had just returned from a doctor's appointment minutes earlier. Dana asked for directions, and Dora invited her inside to look at a map. Once inside, Dana attacked and ended Dora's life. Dora's boyfriend of 8 years, Louis Dorman, discovered her body later that day. An hour after the attack, Dana was using Dora's credit card on another shopping spree. The community of Canyon Lake descended into panic. Elderly residents, many of them widows living alone, began moving in with relatives or gathering in groups at designated houses, believing there was safety in numbers. Some residents theorized the attacks were the work of a cult engaged in ritual sacrifice. The city council held an emergency meeting. Extra police patrols were added. Everyone was talking about the cases, wondering who would be next. Detective Joseph Greco of the Paris Police Department led the investigation. Yard workers had seen Dana wandering around Norma Davis's condominium on the day of the first offense and identified her from photograph. When Dorinda Hawkins positively identified Dana from a photo lineup, police obtained a search warrant for Dana's home. Inside, they found evidence linking her to the victims. On March 17th, 1994, Dana Sue Gray was arrested while shopping in a mall in Temecula. Initially, Dana denied everything. But as her trial approached in 1998, she pleaded guilty to ending the lives of June Roberts and Dora Beebe, and to the attempted ending of Dorinda Hawkins' life. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to pursue charges in Norma Davis's case and removed the possibility of capital punishment. On October 16, 1998, Dana was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chowchilla, where she will spend the rest of her life paying for the shopping sprees she funded with the lives of 3 elderly women who had done nothing wrong except open their doors to someone they thought needed help. Erica Sheppard. Some people are born into circumstances so oppressive that escape feels like an impossible dream. Erica Sheppard entered the world on September 1st, 1973, delivered in a rice field in Texas, a beginning that foreshadowed the hardships awaiting her. What shapes a teenager into someone capable of unthinkable actions? Is it poverty that grinds hope into dust, or violence that teaches survival at any cost? Before her 20th birthday, Erica would find herself at the center of a tragedy that would keep her locked away for decades, waiting to die. Her childhood unfolded in an environment where stability didn't exist. Poverty and violence weren't occasional visitors. They were permanent residents. By 19, She had endured every single one of the adverse childhood experiences that researchers identify as predictors of future involvement with the criminal justice system. The abuse started when she was barely 3 years old. Her mother later admitted she didn't want to believe what happened to her daughter because acknowledging the truth meant confronting her own failures as a parent. That legacy of abuse had traveled through 2 generations before reaching Erica, a pattern her mother described with brutal honesty when she testified that she feared her own mother until the day she died. By her teenage years, Erica was married, not to escape loneliness, but to flee something worse. Her husband proved violent, trapping her in yet another cycle of harm. When she finally gathered the courage to leave with her 3 children, she sought refuge as shelter for battered women, hoping for counseling and assistance. They turned her away. 27 days later, on June 30th, 1993, her life intersected with James Dickerson, a man who would lead her down a path ending in death, both for his victim and eventually for himself. Dickerson had been complaining about needing money. According to testimony later provided by someone who knew them both, Erica suggested returning to an old theme, though what that meant remained unclear. Dickerson made his intentions explicit, stating that if taking a life was necessary to get money, he would do it. Erica reportedly responded that she would prefer targeting a certain type of person, someone vulnerable, alone, unprotected. That evening, 43-year-old Marilyn Sagemauer was carrying items from her car to the Houston apartment she shared with her daughter. Her front door stood unlocked. Erica and Dickerson saw an opportunity. They entered the residence and waited. When Marilyn came inside, they confronted her, demanding her car keys. She refused. What happened next remains disputed in its details. Who wielded which weapon, who struck first, whose hands committed which acts. But the outcome was undeniable. Marilyn suffered multiple wounds. A plastic bag was placed over her head. A 10-pound statue became a weapon. By the time her daughter discovered her body in a spare bedroom the following day, Marilyn Sagemauer, a real estate agent and mother of 2, was gone. Erica and Dickerson fled to Bay City, Texas, driving Marilyn's vehicle. Authorities found the car there the day after the incident. Witnesses placed both of them using it that same evening. Police arrested them at a motel, recovering a knife from a drawer containing women's clothing. Erica subsequently confessed to her involvement. At trial, she was assigned Charles Brown, a court-appointed attorney who had never served as lead counsel in a death penalty case. The 2 lawyers assisting him possessed even less experience. Brown spent only 1 hour and 10 minutes arguing that Erica's life should be spared during the punishment phase. He presented almost no evidence about her background, the childhood abuse, the domestic violence, the mental health struggles, the desperation that defined her 19 years on Earth. The prosecution portrayed her differently. They called her a jackal and a predator. They told the jury that Erica Sheppard might be a woman, but she was certainly no lady. Her identity as a black woman accused of ending a white woman's life virtually guaranteed the outcome in Harris County, Texas, a jurisdiction that has sentenced more people to death row than any other county in America. Prosecutors dismissed the limited abuse evidence presented at trial as mere excuses. They pointed out she had no bruises, as if trauma always leaves visible marks. The jury deliberated and returned with their verdict on March 1st, 1995, guilty of capital murder and robbery. On March 3rd, they unanimously recommended death. Judge H. Lon Harper formally sentenced 21-year-old Erica Yvonne Sheppard to die on April 25, 1995. She became the 5th woman on Texas death row since capital punishment resumed in 1976. James Dickerson also received a death sentence for his role. During his trial, a doctor testified that he was HIV positive and likely had 3 to 5 years remaining due to his condition's severity. The jury still chose death. Dickerson died on death row in 1999 from AIDS-related complications, never facing execution. For 3 years following her conviction, Erica accepted her fate. She actually requested to waive her remaining appeals and volunteered for execution. Psychiatrists certified her mentally competent to make that decision. Judge Harper signed a death warrant scheduling her execution for April 20th, 1998, making her the second woman issued an execution date after Carla Faye Tucker, who faced lethal injection on February 3rd, 1998. Both were the first women slated for execution since the American Civil War. Then something changed. New legal representation arrived. Lawyers who investigated what her trial attorneys should have discovered. They found evidence of brain damage, cognitive functioning equivalent to a 14-year-old, a lifetime of sexual assault starting at age 3, and documented stays at a battered women's shelter. A Texas district judge named Susan Brown reviewed this new evidence and recommended vacating the death sentence, ruling that trial counsel had failed to present material that could have helped the jury understand Erica's background and its connection to her actions. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Judge Brown's recommendation. Federal judges acknowledged the inadequate representation, but determined they had to defer to state court decisions under federal law. Appeals continued through multiple courts over the following years, each one denying relief. As of 2025, Erica Sheppard remains on Texas death row at the Patrick O'Daniel unit. She is now the longest-serving female prisoner awaiting execution in Texas. More than 30 years since that June evening when she followed James Dickerson into Marilyn Marr's apartment. She converted to Islam while incarcerated. From her cell, which confines her for at least 22 hours daily, she sings lyrics from a Christopher Cross song about sailing and being free. She cannot see outside through her window, which is covered with bars and darkened by glaze. This has been home for 3 decades. Marilyn Marr's family testified about the devastating impact of losing her. Her son spoke of being robbed of 20 or 30 years with his mother, seeking help from a psychologist to process the grief. The pain they carried doesn't diminish because of Erica's traumatic past.